Hello, everyone. We're doing things a little bit different to close the class. Instead of having us go on VoiceThread, I'm going to record what will hopefully be a short YouTube lecture about our next and final assignment, alongside definitions of some terms. You'll see at the end, I will guide you as to how you'll participate in this YouTube lecture, and I'll hopefully explain the assignment clearly enough so that you feel confident about completing it so that you can end this semester as strong as you started it. So let's begin by defining the assignment for ourselves. So if you go to assignments, you'll see that the next assignment is called the Disciplinary Conventions assignment, and the instructions are as follows. Pick a genre of writing within a discourse community. Locate 3 examples of this genre. Observe the similarities and differences in these pieces of writing. Next, compose a 750-word instructional report that teaches future writers in this discipline the writing conventions of the genre. Use your pieces of writing as evidence. It's important to be as specific as possible. So, for example, you must be clear isn't as specific as do not use words like everything and sometimes. So, you might have realized as we were reading this assignment that there are certain terms that are unfamiliar. For example, discourse community, genre, maybe instruction, and maybe things like observing similarities and differences in writing. What does that mean? What are writing conventions? And so hopefully we'll explain this today so that you're clear on what this assignment will involve. You'll see here, this is the rubric for this assignment. So it's worth 15 points. That is 15% of your grade. And I'm really looking for you to identify writing conventions, analyze these writing conventions, use evidence, that would be pieces of writing, pay attention to your audience, and of course, I'm looking to see that you're being mindful of the things that we've talked about up until this point. We've talked about integration of quotes, we've talked about citation styles, we've talked about summary, analysis, paragraph structure. So I am hoping to see all of those techniques at work in your report. We'll come back to this because right now, me saying writing conventions might not mean anything because we don't know what those are. Okay, so in order for us to understand, sorry, that was a erroneous slide. In order for us to understand how to complete this assignment, we need to understand these specific terms: discourse community, genre, writing conventions, and instruction. So let's start with discourse community. Hopefully the short article that I asked for you to read in this module gave you a little bit of context of what discourse communities are, but this is a really great short quote that I think says it all. Discourse communities are social entities with distinctive writing practices as a result of the community's shared values and goals, material conditions for text production, and influence of community members. They employ genres to carry out the community's purposes and have norms for text, otherwise known as good writing, and specific roles for writers. So, what does that mean? That means discourse communities are essentially a group of people that exchange knowledge, and this knowledge can be exchanged through writing. So an example of a discourse community could be a group of teachers. These teachers exchange knowledge through sharing lesson plans. These teachers share knowledge through exchanging memos. These teachers exchange knowledge through sharing reports about various students, right? That would be one example of a discourse community. Another example might be teachers and parents. So teachers and parents communicate knowledge with each other, maybe through student conference notes or assessments. Another kind of discourse community might be teachers and students. So members of this discourse community exchange knowledge through assignments or through feedback, right? So in order for a teacher to convey a certain kind of knowledge to his or her students, they're going to need to give feedback. And feedback is, again, a kind of writing. So if you recall in this definition, the idea of social entities, right? So it's a group of people. And the idea of shared values and goals. Well, teachers, right? A group of teachers, they do have similar goals and values, right? Their aim is to educate. Teachers and parents, they also have similar goals and values. Their goal is to educate this particular child. Teachers and students, their goals are also similar. Making sure they do well in a particular class, whether it's the teacher wanting the student to do well or the student wanting to do well for him or herself. So that's what that part means. And the idea of material conditions for text production, it just means how are you exchanging this kind of writing? Is it through something like lesson plans that are on paper? Is it through feedback that's given online? Is it through student conference reports that's emailed, right? So like how are these pieces of writing exchanged? That's something that's interesting to think about. And the influence of community members part, and that's the part that like I find really fascinating. It's this idea that when you're writing within a community, often how you write sort of evolves because you're really writing for the community. And so what the community wants ultimately influences what you write. So for example, what I include in a memo really depends on what members of my community want me to put or want to know from my memo. So again, it's the idea that discourse communities are fascinating because the kind of writing that's shared, it's not like you're writing something like in a vacuum, right? The thing you're writing has an immediate audience, and this audience can, in a lot of ways, influence the way that you're writing. And so another, I think, maybe better, less clunky way to explain this would be we're in a discourse community together, right? English 121 or DW's English 121 is a discourse community. And so the kind of writing that you're sharing with me has everything to do with the expectations that I have, right? So the idea is you're writing what you're writing in many ways for what I'm asking for the kind of knowledge I am requesting. Another thing is, or actually, I kind of explained this. So you'll find writing shared in a discourse community is specifically meant for members within that community. And so another example I give is if your family is a discourse community, right? What are different types of writing you share within your family? And how are these pieces of writing designed specifically for your family members? And so this is an example I could think of. In my family, if my family is a discourse community, we communicate primarily through WhatsApp messages, right? And so in these messages, you'll usually find a forwarded image that, has like some sort of flower and says, "Have a great day." These messages will usually contain schedules. My brother and I will give our parents our schedules so that they know where we'll be. These messages will contain like various updates about things going on in our academic and professional life. So notice, I am writing these things not for myself. I am writing these things for my community. And that's what I'm trying to stress. Understanding the way that writing within a discourse community is shared, and how writing within a discourse community is created for other members. And so I leave you with the question, who are members of this discourse community writing for, and how does that sort of manifest itself in the writing? Okay, so we hopefully understand discourse communities. If not, you can absolutely pose it as a question in the comment section. Um, the next term, if you remember, would be genre. So earlier, when I talk about my family and I communicating through WhatsApp messages would be a genre of writing. And so, in that way, a genre of writing is essentially a type of writing that has shared or that has similar characteristics and conventions. So, lesson plans would be a genre of writing. Why? Because lesson plans are connected by, specific characteristics. A lesson plan has to have an objective. A lesson plan has to have clear materials. A lesson plan has to have instructions. And so all of those things are characteristics of this genre of writing. Lab reports would be a genre of writing. Why? Because lab reports have similar characteristics. WhatsApp messages can be a genre of writing if you're thinking about it in the way that I explained with my family. Um, Diss tracks, right? That's a genre of writing within the hip hop community. Why? Well, diss tracks tend to have similar features. Recipes, again, a convention. A genre because it has similar conventions. All recipes will give you measurements. Maybe all recipes will pay attention to, like the all recipes will talk directly to the reader who is going to be cooking whatever the recipe calls for. So that's what genre is. And just this is me trying to be as clear as possible. Discourse communities are a group of people that exchange information through writing. They share this writing to achieve some goal. And again, like I've been stressing before, they're writing for each other. Genre is a kind of writing communities produce to communicate with one another, right? So teachers, right, in order to communicate with one another, they produce the genre of writing called lesson plans. Teachers and parents, in order to communicate with each other, produce this genre of writing called assessments, right? And a genre of writing has shared characteristics. Characteristics is really interchangeable with this word convention. So if you remember, the other term that I wanted us to define is writing conventions. And writing conventions are basically techniques in writing or characteristics within the genre. What are some conventions of a lesson plan? Well, some of the writing conventions of a lesson plan are you need to have, like I said earlier, a clear objective. Your sentences must be concise. You must, within your lesson plan, list the Board of Ed objectives that you're going to be meeting, right? These are all conventions. And so, of course, and with any assignment, I always think about like, how can I relay sort of my intent in assigning this assignment? And so for this assignment, I think it will be useful because it is a clear way of getting you to think about writing because you're looking at writing. I also find that it can be useful for folks to pick a genre of writing that will be something that they have to write for their major, right? So, for example, if you're planning on going to nursing school, or sorry, if you're planning on becoming a nursing major, what are some genre of writings that are expected in that major? For example, literature review or an observation report. And you can use this assignment as a way to understand or get acquainted with that kind of writing. The other reason why I like this is I think it's important for us to see that, sometimes these genres of writing, there's a reason why you're expected to do certain things. So, for example, if you were to do a report on lesson plans, you might find that through your research that the reason why objectives are a necessary convention in this genre is because it's the only way for teachers to communicate the kind of goals that they're meeting. Or you might realize that the lesson plan has the convention of um, instructions because it's a way to communicate with other instructors worldwide how they might replicate a really great lesson, right? So it's interesting to think about why we write the way we write in a particular genre. And then, of course, the other part of this assignment is I'm asking you to instruct. And so, why do you have to instruct? Why can't you just say, here's what I found out? Why do you have to sort of teach an outsider about this genre? And I think it's useful because learning how to write to teach is a particular kind of skill. And I always equate it to the difference between sort of fixing a computer problem versus showing someone how to fix the computer problem. So when you're fixing a computer issue, right, like if you're fixing some sort of malware issue or you're installing something, you're by yourself and you're sort of doing it on your own. When there's someone next to you, though, who's asking you to explain it to them, it forces you to sort of think about, like, why am I doing these things? How can I explain this to this person in a way that they'll understand? So you're thinking a lot about language, you're thinking a lot about why certain things are done, and that's the kind of analysis I really want you to do for this assignment. And so another example of a disciplinary convention report that I've received in the past is, okay, so I am in a discourse community with Professor Walia, and a genre of writing within Professor Walia's class is called the A paper. And what are the conventions of an A paper? And so they, in this particular example, this student asked other students to share their papers if they received an A. And then he analyzed all of the A papers and came up with a list of conventions. An A paper for Walia's class must have a thesis statement. And so he sort of he taught other students about how to craft this kind of thesis statement. It was a funny paper because some of the things that he noted I didn't realize I care so much about. Like, he said, if you want to get an A paper, you can't have the word this anywhere, anywhere at all, which I now realize is something that I'm a stickler about. So, yeah, that's just another example of how you can approach this assignment. So what are you doing then for this assignment? You're identifying a community that exchanges information through writing. You're going to pick a genre of writing that this community uses. You're going to analyze 3 examples of this genre of writing. And then you're going to submit a report that attempts to teach an outsider the rules or conventions of this genre. And so in order to analyze any piece of writing, you're going to want to think about the style, tone, and method. Style means thinking about formatting, thinking about word choice, thinking about sentence choice, thinking about sentence construction. Tone would be sort of how the writer communicates with its audience, formally, informally. Method would be how everything is put together. And that, I think, if you sort of get to these 3 points, you'll have a really hearty analysis of a piece of writing. And here I've listed, I mean, I kind of went through this already, but just in case it's still not clear, here is a sample step-by-step process that you can follow when completing this assignment. So step 1, thinking about the discourse community, thinking about what is this discourse community that I'm interested in, who are the members, what is the goal of this community, how do they communicate with each other, what kind of writing do they exchange, what is the genre of writing that you'll be focusing on. Then understanding the genre that you've chosen. Read sample pieces of this genre based on the samples you have. What is a working definition of this genre? Then understanding the genre as a reader. Who are the readers of this genre? What does the reader pay attention to when reading something in this genre? What does the reader want from this piece of writing? So if a teacher is reading a lesson plan, right? This teacher wants particular things in their lesson plan that they're reading. They want to know what the materials are that they'll need if they want to replicate this lesson. They want to know what the goals are that have been met by completing this lesson, right? So what does the reader want? Then think about the genre as a writer. Reread these sample pieces of writing. What is the writer trying to communicate? What strategies does the writer use to communicate these ideas? And then start building a list of characteristics, conventions of this genre. Then think about your goal. Your goal is to teach an outsider how to write this diss track. Sorry, that shouldn't be diss track. That should be how to write a piece of writing or a genre. What must you include your report if you're trying to teach an outsider about how to write whatever genre of writing you've picked? And then develop an outline. And often this outline will have body paragraphs that really focus on describing single conventions. And so here's an example from a student in my other section that I thought was really eloquent and insightful. He looked at pharmacists as a type of discourse community, and he was specifically interested in the genre of pharmacy orders or prescription orders. And then he organized his paragraphs according to, I guess, the different features of a prescription order. So he looked at subscripts. What are subscripts? How does it work? He gave some examples of subscripts, and then he also explained why it's important for the reader who may or may not be a patient. And then he went on to look at superscripts, and I believe he had two other features that he analyzed in this same way. And so this is, again, another way of thinking about this assignment, right? Outlining ahead of time so that it's clear to you what you'll focus on and how you'll be teaching your reader how to write in this genre. Okay, so what I'd like you to do now is I'd like you to participate in this discussion by commenting on this video with answers to all four of these points. I want you to define discourse communities in your own words. I want you to identify a discourse community of your own. You don't have to be in this discourse community, but I just want you to give me an example of a discourse community. Please don't refer to the ones that we've already talked about. I want you to identify a genre of writing within the discourse community that you just noted, and then I want you to identify two conventions within the genre of writing that you just noted. So you'll see everything sort of has to build off of the other, but it's an important exercise, and it's quite possible that what you develop here will ultimately become the starting point for your disciplinary report. So please do that. And once you've participated, the next thing I'm asking you to do is we're also going to be doing discussion boards a little differently. I've put you all into groups. I have assigned a specific genre to each of these groups. I am asking that you work with your group member within your discussion thread to craft a sort of mini conventions report on the genre that I have assigned you. I want at the end of all of this to see that you've come up with an introduction and two sample body paragraphs. So one of you will be in charge of putting together all of the stuff that you talk about in these discussion threads. And this thing that you're putting together should be an introduction and two sample body paragraphs. I'm going to have a little bit more information on the discussion forum, but I am asking that you complete this by November 30th so that you'll have an entire week to then go on and work on your own disciplinary conventions assignment. I'm hoping that you found this instruction useful. If you have any questions, please feel free to pose them as a comment on this video. Until then, I'll see you.